Coach, let's just for a second just talk about, can you update Nardella's status?
He should be fine. You know, right now he's been practicing full speed, so we just needed to, you know, be sure with him before we put him back in there.
When you think back at the 4 meetings between these two teams this year, is there anything in particular that stands out that made the difference?
The difference for what?
In the outcomes of the games versus the rest.
Well, I think our inability to finish was certainly a factor. I mean, Minnesota's playing a much more strict defensive style now than they have in the past, and you know, trying to get pucks through, they block a lot of shots, and getting through the neutral zone. I mean, they play that 1-4 type of system in the neutral zone. So, and that's always given us problems. I mean, we work on it, trying to break it, you know, as much as possible. But, you know, whether it was St. Cloud or Minnesota Duluth or Minnesota now, I mean, they all play that same neutral zone system, and it's challenging to get through with possession. So you either have to accept the fact that you're going to, you know, chip pucks in and get the forecheck going, or you have to try to break it down. We haven't had a tremendous amount of success in the latter. So we have to, you know, we have to just make sure that we do a good job of not turning pucks over, because that plays into their strength, which is their transition game.
When you think about what Spencer did last weekend, moving up to play with Andrew, what was in his skill set that allowed you to make the decision for him to be the replacement for Nardella? And going forward, what does that mean for him?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it was his skill set so much. I think it was confidence. You know, he's always had the skill and ability, the skating ability. You know, one thing people don't recognize, too, is he's really well built. He's strong physically. And so it doesn't matter that he's not 6'2". He's got a body and he's not afraid of confrontation. So it's not like he's a big hitter, but physically he's strong in one-on-one situations at the net front and those type of things. And it was an easy decision for us. I mean, once we knew Bob wasn't playing, to put Spencer up there, and he did a great job, you know, and he played a lot of minutes against the Kodarenko line, and, you know, we'll probably keep him there, you know, and try to use Bobby in maybe in a role that will allow him to be a little bit more offensively minded.
How would you describe the impact of your 4th line the last month, what they've been giving you?
Well, I mean, you know, it's actually 4 members to that line, because, you know, I've used 4 different guys there with, you know, sometimes Jack plays center, sometimes Cam Burke. But Pierce Crawford's really, you know, come a long ways in our eyes. You know, he's always been there, and he's always, you know, we always look at sometimes that he's not the fastest skater, which, you know, impacts him a little bit, but his compete level and his intelligence make up for that. And Jack's always been Jack, plays a high compete level, and then whether you have Cam Burke there who skates really well and he's smart and competes well, or you have you know, Matt Steves, who's more of a physical force. They all bring different things to the table, but they've been really, really crucial to our team over the last, you know, month or so. You know, we generally, you know, more recently have dressed 13 forwards, so I use all of them, you know, and see who's going. And you know, the other night when we had that major penalty, obviously it paid dividends to have that 4th forward there. And 3 of the 4 are top penalty killers, which really makes a big difference for our depth, because we're not using first and second line guys, tiring them out. So in the 3rd period, they're not available to score a goal or fresh enough.
Finally, for me, I know you always want the last change, and you'll have that Saturday. Is the last change more important this weekend, knowing that they're a little more balanced, the scoring can come from other places, compared to Michigan State, with that one real dominant line? Yeah,
it's probably easier last weekend. I mean, if you have more balance, it's more challenging. You have to make the right choices, you know, which line matches up best based on the success. But, you know, for me, it's more about the defensive changes than it is the forward changes. I'm not as concerned. Sometimes, you know, I learned a long time ago, Scotty Bowman, you know, brought me into his office at Joe Louis Arena and talked to me about how he manages changes. And sometimes I'm looking to match up against the other team's defensive pair as compared to the forward line. Now, sometimes in some situations, like against the Kodarenko line, some lines, I mean, our freshman line has done such a good job of possessing the puck. You know, they're not a defensive line per se. They're a shutdown line in a different way. They're more of a matchup line than they are a shutdown line. They shut down the opponent a lot by controlling the puck. They do a good job on the forecheck. They cycle the puck. They counter pressure really well. They're all on the same page. You know, they all understand the system. So they've been really effective for us as a matchup line. I wouldn't call them a shutdown line. So, for that line to play up against one of the top two lines, it's not just about them keeping the opponent off the board. It's also about them, pressuring the opposing team's defense. Because most teams, like with Michigan State, they want to put their best offensive players out with the Kodorenko line. So they're also utilizing their best defensemen offensively. So that kind of opens up the door for other lines to maybe play against the second or third pair. And that's where I think our fourth line is capitalized. Is that they've gotten a chance to play minutes against the third pair of defensemen, and they've taken advantage of it because they're such a good forechecking line.
Jeff, you take a look at the play of Cale Morris last weekend, and can you go back to last season and compare? Are they playing about? Is he playing about the way he was at this point last season?
Well, I think of the playoffs. Yeah, I mean he's been our rock in almost every situation. But I thought, one of my reasons for wanting to play Dylan a little bit more in the second half, as opposed to the first half, was to give Cale more of a breather in the second half. But I mean, he's got his game going. I mean, he's playing at an optimal level right now, and we're going to need him to because Minnesota's they've got good scoring forwards and they got a good power play. So we're going to have great defensive play and goaltending, and and defend well as a team. But goaltending is always the key in the playoffs. I mean, that and special teams generally are the difference.
I saw the story on USCHO yesterday. You were talking about Cale, and you talked about how you think he might, just other than those two games at Mercyhurst in the first half of the Penn State game, he's been about what he was last year.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple games that are outliers. He had a couple tough games in the first half, the first and the last one of the first half. And you eliminate those two games, and his save percentage is not much different than it was a year ago, or his goals against average. Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but
they're similar.
Yeah.
Did the work.
Yeah, I would think that they would be similar. I mean, he's had a similar season. I mean, that's why everybody always asks me, well, he's not having as good a numbers or good a year as he did last year. I beg to differ. He had a couple tough games this year, which he didn't have last year because, we went into the start of the season last year not knowing if he was the starter. I mean, he was, meant to be the heir apparent, but we also had a really good young goalie in Dylan St. Cyr. So, going into the year last year, those two guys rotated the first 8 games. This year, he went in as the guy and found out real quick that he had to get his act back together.
Well, go ahead, Pete.
Given where you guys fall right now in the rankings, how critical do you think this weekend is for you guys, big picture?
Well, I think we're to the point where we have to win to go on. I don't think we can assume anything less. I'm not talking about it. I mean, I'm talking about, hey, we're playing in a semifinal to have a chance to play in a championship game to have a chance in another Big Ten championship. So our focus point, our total focus has to be on one thing and one thing only, because we still control our own destiny, and we worked hard to finish in second, to be able to play at home this weekend. And, last year I thought it helped us, just being the crowd. They were still overtime games. I mean, both the semifinal and the final, so it's going to be like that. You have to accept that, and you just have to hope that you score that goal, when it matters the most at the end of the game. So, we just have to focus on Saturday night right now, and, everything else will take care of itself. I mean, we put ourselves in a position to be on the bubble, and now we have to put ourselves in a position to get off of it.
Do you want your guys carrying themselves this week and beyond, if possible, as if they're the Big Ten champs until someone takes it from them?
Well, I think that really needs to come from our veterans and our veteran leadership, and we still have a young group. I mean, we have a younger team that's got a lot of young guys playing in key roles, and this is the first time through for a lot of these guys. I thought they really handled it well last weekend. You think about Spencer Stastny, Nate Klurman on defense. You think about the freshman line plus Michael Graham. They're going through this for the first time, and but they've never been through this single elimination, and that's basically what we're in right now for the rest of the season. So, you know, that's why I don't want to put a lot of emphasis on anything past Saturday night. You know, because we just have to focus on winning Saturday night, and everything else will take care of itself.
Does it kind of bother you though a little bit that, you know, that the pairwise ratings kind of look like they benefit the Eastern schools more than the Western schools? I mean, you're playing a Minnesota team that's won 7 of its last 8, and they're 20th in the ranking. And, you know, I know everybody talks about how computers do the ranking and stuff like that, but somebody's programming the computers. Why we got this situation the way it is?
You know, it's a cut and dry system, and I think college hockey coaches have accepted it. Not to say that it's right. I mean, you know, like the way it used to be done in the back room. You know, they'd still have their computer rankings, but the final decisions were made on other factors, and they do that in basketball to some degree too, is that they take into account the last 10 games, because certainly Minnesota, the way they're playing right now, you know, should be an NCAA team. They just knocked off Ohio State 2 games. They knocked off Arizona State 2 games. They've knocked off teams that are in the top 10, you know, consistently. So there is something to be said for, you know, because, I mean, the one thing they don't take into account is some teams miss several players for the World Juniors at times. Like Penn State lost their best defenseman at the World Juniors. You know, Michigan lost a guy coming out of the World Juniors. And then you think about injuries and how they impact the season. A lot of it's, you know, the one thing that has to really be looked at it, like, you know, if the Big Ten adds another team here in the next few years, if we're playing 28 league games, how does that impact us? Because I think the fact that Arizona State's played all non-conference games has helped them in the pairwise. They've had a good season, don't get me wrong, and they've beaten some good teams. But the thing is the fact that there's no comparison for them. Like, every time we play, we're compared to the other Big Ten teams, and all the Big Ten teams, with the exception of Ohio State, are 500 teams in the conference. So we're being compared against ourselves, basically. And, you know, teams that have more non-conference games, you know, they're being compared against other conferences. So, but our conference needs to do well. Like Minnesota, ourselves, you know, I'm sure there's other teams I'm not thinking of right now. Michigan, maybe. You know, if you think of the fact that Minnesota did lose to St. Lawrence, and we tied Mercyhurst, or when you have those kind of games where you're playing a team that, you know, Mercyhurst actually a pretty decent record this year, but like St. Lawrence, losing to St. Lawrence really, really probably hammered Minnesota.
Dakota losing twice at Canisius.
Well, it's certainly that's hurting them. You know, there's no question. And then, you know, Merrimack, didn't they beat Michigan at Yost? And then it's not just losing, but losing at home against these teams. So those games not just impact Michigan and Minnesota, they impact us. And that's why the Eastern teams, because Merrimack won, St. Lawrence won, any of those games, they matter. You know, they make a big, big difference. But on the other side, though, Michigan State knocking off Cornell twice at the beginning of the year helps us. So the non-conference games really do matter. And, you know, those are affecting all the Big Ten teams right now, because going head-to-head, like I said, it's almost like going against yourself, because everybody's 500.
Thanks, Coach.
Sure.